Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Resolving Team Conflict digital event. My name is Natasha and I'm an events coordinator at the CMI. I'll shortly be handing over to David to begin today's event. If you have any questions during the digital event, you can ask them using the live chat box to the right of your screen, and we shall answer as many as we can during the Q&A. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared with those who booked to attend. The event recording will also be available on the CMI website and the CMI YouTube channel. Now over to David, CHMC Assessment Manager at CMI, to begin the event.
Thanks, Natasha, and welcome everybody to this morning's webinar. Before I start, I want to say some things about conflict really. And conflict is, we could spend weeks talking about resolving conflict, and we can spend years trying to get to the bottom of certain types of conflict. So what I want to cover today is what we understand about conflict as it might happen in a team, how we can potentially avoid that happening, what we need to do in order to try to avoid conflict as much as possible. And I'm thinking here about negative conflict rather than positive conflict, and I'll talk about that as we go through as well. Give you some tips and techniques of how to deal with conflict, and then how to prevent conflict happening in the first place. So a number of things I want to cover, a short space of time, so I'm going to crack on and cover things as much as possible generally. We can take questions at the end, and as Natasha said, you will get a copy of this anyway. So when we're thinking about conflict, we need to first understand that whenever you've got more than one person, conflict is going to happen. And that conflict may be a difference of opinion, it may be an agitated discussion, it may be a full-out disagreement. I'm never going to speak to you again unless we have this thing mediated. It may be something worse, it may be something less, but whenever you've got more than one person in a room or more than one person in a team, you're going to have, at some point, you're going to have some conflict. And from my experience and the experience of a lot of people, that the best way through that conflict is through clear and open dialogue, which is honest, transparent, understanding the other person, trying to see from the other person's point of view, displaying levels of empathy and trying to understand, but without giving in your own personal take on this as well. And it requires both sides, obviously, to come to a table with open, honest and communication in mind, and very much with an open heart. When we're dealing with conflict, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not I win by you losing, or if you win, I lose. It's coming to that agreement in the middle where we can both walk away from this as happy as we possibly can be, both understanding the other side's position and both understanding how we're going to move forward from here and how we're going to stop conflict rearing up to such a great degree in the future. And I think it's really important to understand people and how people work when we're thinking about conflict as well. Now, one of the things that often is seen to exacerbate conflict is when we try to impose a resolution on other people, and that's really, really dangerous. And I'll cover that a bit more as we go through this today as well. So before we think about resolving conflict in teams, we kind of need to understand our team, and we need to understand what our team are doing, who the individuals in the team are, where they're coming from in terms of personality, in terms of types of operation, in terms of age, background, culture, religion, all those kinds of areas. What do people bring to a team that make that team so dynamic? But we need to understand who they are, where they're coming from, what their perspective on things is, if we're going to understand how conflict arises and how we can potentially mitigate conflict and resolve conflict as and when it does arise. We need to understand where our team are in terms of skills. What are their skills, not only in the jobs that they do, their understanding of what other people in the team do, but also in their skills in terms of communication and resolving conflict, their willingness, if you like, to get engaged with conflict and get engaged in proper resolution seeking as well. We need to find where gaps are in teams. Where are the gaps in terms of skills, in terms of understanding, in terms of age, in terms of understanding culture, in terms of understanding the way we work as an organization and the way we work as a team. We need to think outside the team as well. Even though we're looking at how the team works, we need to think about who the people are that the team is dealing with, because that can add conflict as well. And lack of understanding of our customers and our suppliers can cause us to have conflict within the team because of the way we work. That comes back to what I was saying about gaps and understanding. If we don't If we have team members that don't really understand how our suppliers and how our customers work, that can cause conflict within the team. We also need to think about a consistent approach to our customers and suppliers as well, because that's really important in helping resolve team conflict. We don't want to end up with a situation where I deal with a customer in one way and they love speaking to me. You deal with a customer in another way and they hate speaking to you because they don't get what they want. I'm giving them something that I shouldn't be giving them because we've agreed not to do that, or you're giving them something, you're not giving them something that we've agreed not to give them, but in the past they've spoken to me and they think they're going to get everything they need. So we need to understand how we're dealing with our customers, how we're dealing with our suppliers, because inevitably that will cause conflict within the team as well. We need to understand where our hotspots and our choke points are. What is stopping work from flowing? Where are the points where we're going to have a lot of work to do? Everybody needs to knuckle down. Everybody needs to get stuck in. We forget the 9 to 5 for a couple of days, probably. We're working longer, we're working harder, we're working different, but we understand that it's for a particular purpose and it's not going to be a permanent situation. Now, if that kind of work activity moves into being a permanent situation, then you're going to get conflict. And you're going to get conflict with the team and the organization because that's not what people signed up for. That becomes stressful, it becomes unmanageable, it becomes unsustainable. So we need to think about things like that can slip into becoming normal, which are going to cause more conflict in the longer run. We need to think about who's doing what. So what are people doing? Where are they in the team structure? And you can think about Tuckman here with the forming, storming, norming, performing, and mourning. And this is really important to revisit this every time your team changes. If somebody leaves your team, somebody new comes along and fills a post that wasn't there before, as a new post has been created for additional work capacity or dealing with extraordinary tasks, we need to go back to the forming, storming, norming, because that's where conflict will generate from initially. People will want to rise to the top. People will want to be seen to be the top dog. People will be jockeying for position in terms of potential promotions, potential enhancements, whatever it might be. That's automatically going to cause unnecessary tension and conflict if we don't explain that, we don't go through all that, we don't communicate why we're doing that in the first place. Now, one of the other things that happens is we don't act as a facilitator for our team. And we forget what our role is as a manager. And it's really important here to remember that if we are specialists in a role, we might be great technicians, we might be great coders, we might be whatever it might be, but we've reached the top of our tree in that particular role, and then we've moved into management. Our role is not to continue to be that high-level specific technician and look after people. Our role is to look after people and facilitate the success of the team as a whole. Now, if we don't do that, sometimes that can result in conflict as well, because what are we doing? What is our role? Where is the clarity for our team? Where is the clarity for us? Where is the clarity for our organization? And we can fall into those downward pieces of the transactional analysis circle, if you like, where we become a parent rather than an adult, and we're doing things for people, and we're disempowering people unconsciously, unintentionally, but that will cause conflict within the team and conflict within each other as well, because people will see people perceived to be getting away with stuff because we're stepping in as a parent. So we need to be careful of all these things, and we need to really step back every so often and say, what am I doing? Is what I'm doing as a manager, as a team leader, facilitating the success of the team, or am I getting in the way of the success? And if you're getting in the way, you need to get out of the way and make sure that the team can be successful, because otherwise you're going to find yourself the root of a lot of conflict here. Unconsciously, unnecessarily, no intention based here, but this is the sort of thing that can happen. So step back, say, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I facilitating the success, or am I getting in the way of it? We need to think about where we are now and where our current weaknesses, strengths are, where our opportunities are, what are the issues that are causing us problems or potentially going to cause us problems. Do we have a clear mission statement? Is it a mission statement that everybody can get behind? Do we have clear goals? Do we have a clear vision? What are we aiming for as a team? What are we aiming for as an organization? And do our team members know that? Because if they don't, they've probably set up their own goals, their own vision, and they may conflict with yours, conflict with the team, conflict with the organization, conflict with other people. But in the absence of having that clarity, in the absence of having those laid out properly, that's what people will do. We all do it. Nobody wants to work in a vacuum. Nobody wants to work in that abyss. If it's not there, we will find it and we will develop it ourselves. And often it's different to what everybody else is doing. So there becomes a conflict because we're not clear, we're not transparent, we're not communicating, we're not working to the same end. Are we developing silos that by their very nature will become competitive? Is my team working to the same ends ultimately as your team, as the organization as a whole? Because if not, it's very easy to see your team as the competition and we need to beat your team, or your team needs to beat my team. Your team needs to be the first to produce. My team needs to produce a better quality. If we do that, subconsciously, we fight with each other and there's a conflict. And that can lead to problems in terms of performance, and problems in terms of outputs, problems in terms of production, as well as the wider problems that come with conflict within a team. We've talked about choke points and we've talked about hotspots, but where are we in terms of those now? Have we identified those, and are we in a choke point? And if we're in a choke point or a hotspot, have we communicated that to the team so that the team know that working late, working extra, doing that a bit harder today is today and potentially tomorrow, but not the longer term? This is a blip. We get over this, we get back to business as usual, get back to business as normal. Because if that's not clear and it becomes business as normal, as I said, that's a big generator for conflict in the future. So where are we? What are our team doing? What do they look like? Where are the gaps? Who's jockeying for position? Who's feeling pushed out? Who's feeling hard done by? All of these things we need to do as a manager, look back and step out and say, I can see what's happening, taking a helicopter view, see what's happening with my team. I know who's who. I know where the strengths are. I know where the weaknesses are. I know what's coming up. I can communicate that to the team. Everybody knows what's going on and we can see a way forward together. So when we think about the teams like that and looking at taking that helicopter view, will give us an idea of what's going on within their team and what they're actually doing right now. So how are they spending their time? Are they doing things that need doing? Are they doing things because they've always been done that way and they don't really understand why they're doing them? They've taken over that role from somebody else. They're doing things that don't need to be done. One of the biggest things you see in this kind of realm is reporting. So people will spend a lot of time looking at data, creating reports that nobody looks at. You think, why am I doing this? Why are you doing this? Nobody looks at this. I don't want this. Nobody wants this. You took this over from the person who was in the role before you. They had it as a comfort blanket. Nobody challenged it because the person that initially asked them for it has now moved on. So nobody really knows why this thing is done, but it causes so much pain and it gets in the way of other things. People will say, can we have a meeting? We need to discuss this. No, I need to get this report done. Well, when can we meet? When I finish this report? Well, why do you need to do the report? You're questioning why I need to do the report. What's going on? Why are you always challenging me? Why are you always picking on me? Why can't you let me get on with my work? All those things can sometimes result from something that's being done that doesn't need to be done. People do things they don't need to do because it makes them happy. And it's our job as team leaders and managers to facilitate the success of the team, and sometimes by taking things away from people and saying, you don't need to do this. This is not something that needs to continue. This is causing you grief. It's causing the team grief. Nobody's benefiting from this. All it's doing is causing conflict. So we can look at things like that and say, what needs to be done? Why are we doing it? Can your team and can individuals and can you articulate what you're aiming for? Can you articulate the vision? Can you articulate the goals? Can you articulate why you do what you do? Because if you can't, that sounds a really silly question, but if you can't do that clearly, you're probably not doing things that need to be done, and you're probably going to end up feeling the frustration of that, feeling the burn of that, resulting in conflict that doesn't need to happen because we've got that lack of clarity. We need to be able to articulate what our values are. What are our team values and what motivates the people in achieving those team values? Is there motivation or isn't there motivation? Are people working towards these goals, these values that we've set, we've established, or are they not? And if they're not, that's going to cause conflict as well. And sometimes people are doing a brilliant job in the wrong place. The wrong place in terms of the values that the team or the organization holds jar with their own values. But rather than saying, this isn't the right place for me, I need to leave, I need to go to another team, I need to go to another department, I need to go to another organization, they'll stay, we stay as humans, and we fight it because that's not what we see as important. So we will set up our own barriers and we will fight everybody who tries to knock those barriers down because we aren't agreeing with the team values. Now, you may be sitting there thinking, well, that's all right, but I need this job, I need the money, and that's fine. And sometimes we have to work through this. Sometimes we have to say, I need to pay the rent, I need to pay the mortgage, I need to pay the bills, and my God, the bills are going up. But, we need to think about all those things and think about the longer term and say, this is where I am now. Is this going to be a long-term proposition for me? Or do I need to just go with this, do the best I can, and think about where I go next that's going to chime more with my values? And we all get challenged by that. And if we're not honest enough to say, that's what I need to do, then we will continually develop conflict because we won't be able to agree longer term with values that we don't agree with us, values that don't chime with us, values that don't sit well with us, goals that don't sit well with us. We don't understand why we're aiming and what we're aiming at. So we get very, very upset. We get frustrated. We get conflict. And what we really need to do sometimes to resolve that conflict is to take some action ourselves and say, right, I'm going to give myself 3 months to find somewhere else that does sit better with me. So we need to think about these things. We all have a responsibility in identifying where the conflict is coming from, taking action on the conflict to resolve that conflict. And sometimes it's just internal conflict. Sometimes it's external. Sometimes it's something else completely. But we need to look at that and understand it for ourselves. Team conflict it can be a number of things. It can be a really serious problem. It can be just an argument, just a disagreement. It can be very productive, but it can be a really serious problem that actually gets in the way of a lot of things happening. It can result in loss of productivity if we're producing things because the conflict becomes the feature rather than the production, rather than the quality that we're delivering. That becomes second to resolving the conflict. We get tasked to work with somebody. I hate that person. How am I ever going to work with them? They don't understand what I do. I don't understand what they do. What is the point of this? Nobody is giving us that clarity. So that results in loss of productivity. Conflict can result in loss of creativity as well, because we are challenged. We find that challenge rather than having the space to be creative, rather than having the freedom to say, what I'm going to go and do is to create this. We're so stuck in the weeds doing things that we don't need to do that we lose our creativity. We lose that space in order to be able to be creative. So when you start to think about these things, you can see that team conflict is so much more than just a disagreement, so much more than an argument. Although sometimes that's all it is, let's be honest, but it can be greater than that. It can cause a lot of problems outside. We can lose customers. We can lose reputation. We could end up in a situation where we're involved in litigation. We've gone to an employment tribunal for whatever reasons as a result of a conflict that we haven't dealt with, that didn't need to arise in the first place. We can find that recruitment is harder. We find that churn is much higher, but getting people in is hard because the reputation is that we have a lot of conflict. The reputation is that this is not a good place to work, because the conflict leads to poor management. The poor management potentially leads to bullying. The bullying leads to litigation. Litigation leads to public notice of it. Public notice of it leads to problems in recruitment. And so all these things that we don't deal with can be much bigger than just having a disagreement within the team. But we really need to think about this. Are we doing all we can to stop conflict arising in the first place? Now, conflict arises from a lot of different places, and there are a number of ways that we need to think about this and understand what's going on here. We can think about interdependence causing conflict. I'm waiting for you to do something in order that I can finish a task that I'm charged with. I've done everything I can, and you're not delivering your piece. That's going to cause conflict, or vice versa. You've done everything you can, and I'm not delivering what I said I would deliver, so that's going to cause some conflict. We can think about leadership as causing conflict. And the biggest problem with leadership causing conflict is lack of clarity. Two things: lack of clarity and lack of parity in the way that we deal with people. So we're playing Peter against Paul. We're favoring one against another. Those kinds of things will definitely lead to conflict. We can think about work style. Some people like to work in the mornings. Some people like to work better in the afternoons. Some people work in absolute clutter. Some people have to have a spotless, clear desk in order to work and crack on and be creative. We can think about conflict in terms of personality. People just clash. Now, not everybody is going to get on with everybody all the time. If that were the case, we'd be living in a utopia and it wouldn't be real. We'd all be in a big dream machine. So sometimes it's about just disengaging personalities in order to get people to work better in different parts of the team, different parts of the organization. We can have different ideas about creativity, which can lead to conflict. I think we need to build this. You think we need to build that. Who's right? Who's wrong? Let's conflict. Let's blah, 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 blah. Sometimes that can be productive. Often it can be just destructive, and we need to be very careful of that and be aware of these roots of conflict. We can have conflict on the back of discrimination, and discrimination for all sorts of reasons. The conflict can be very constructive or it can be destructive. And sometimes we think about how can conflict be constructive? Well, constructive conflict can come about as a result of, I want to do this in a particular way. You want to do that in a particular way. You don't think my way is going to work. I'm going to find some time to do it myself and bring it back when it's further developed. And hopefully we'll all say, well, yeah, why didn't we think of that? Or vice versa. So we need to think about conflict as sometimes being constructive. There's a story, I don't know if it's an urban myth or apocryphal, but the story is that when they developed the iPod, the original iPod, the chap that developed it was told he couldn't do it at work. Nobody would have a market for that. Nobody would want that kind of thing. So he went off and developed it in his garage and came back with a fully functioning first iPod. And everybody was like, yeah, hold on a minute. That's the good result of conflict. That's really come about as being an effective thing coming out of conflict. But that comes from a contextual and a perspective point of view, because if you were the person selling Walkmans, that's not good conflict. That's not creative out of conflict, because that's going to cause you a lot of trouble. If you're the person selling vinyl LPs, same thing. If you're the person controlling who can access music, the same thing. That's not going to be positive for you. So it has to be taken in perspective and in context as well. So when you've got conflict, you've noticed the roots of conflict, should you get involved or not? Now, not every conflict is bad, but every conflict can become bad if it's managed badly. So there's an opportunity there to stop things happening badly, to make sure that things don't get any worse. Not every conflict equally will require your involvement, but keep a watching brief on it. What you can't do is to say, I'm going to leave this. If I leave this alone, they'll sort it out between themselves. Like dogs fighting. If I try to split two dogs up, they're going to both attack me and then go back to fighting each other. We need to be careful that we don't ignore conflict, because it can grow, and we will need some involvement at some time, even if it's only to say, I notice you two were not getting on, but I see you've resolved it. Brilliant stuff. Thank you. If you need me to do anything, let me know. So we're facilitating, we're not controlling. The biggest thing you have to be careful not to do is to sleepwalk into conflict. If we ignore things, if we think they're okay, if we don't know what our team's doing, we don't take that helicopter view and see what's happening within the whole group of people that we're responsible for, we're going to sleepwalk into conflict. And suddenly it will be there and we'll be like, whoa, where did this come from? I did not see this on the horizon. But really, you didn't see it on the horizon because you weren't looking. Now, you can't say that for everything, but often that's the case. We didn't want to look, we didn't want to see, and so we didn't. So we've recognized this conflict is happening and how we're going to deal with it, what we're going to do about it. Well, the first thing we can do is before the conflict arrives, and this is always important before the conflict arrives, is we develop that culture where we can address and discuss and debate conflict as it arises. We can agree how we're going to deal with that conflict. You know, if I have an issue with you, how are we going to deal with it? If we wait till we're in the issue to deal with it, that's going to be really hard. So we need to agree with a team charter or something similar. As a team, if problems exist, this is how we're going to deal with it. This is what we're going to do about it. We need to be aware of what's going on and not ignore it. And this is how we're going to deal with it. We need, as team leaders, as managers, to identify the cause of the conflict based on the facts, not on he said, she said. Because if we get into the he said, she said, we're not going to solve this conflict. We're not going to help it resolve. If we get involved in resolving conflict, we need to make sure that we check our biases and we've not already pre-decided an outcome based on the individuals. We need to separate the cause and the issue from the individuals. If we go into a resolution meeting and we think, well, Bob's a great guy, Bob always knows what he's doing. Paul, on the other hand, Paul's always troublesome, he's challenging everything, he's clearly causing this problem, so I'm going to favour Bob. We might not do that consciously, but we need to check our bias to make sure we're not doing that subconsciously. We also need to check our bias to make sure that we're not already coming at a resolution. What I'm going to do is go into that room and bang their heads together because they're acting like children, and what I want to happen is this. If we do that, we're going to impose a resolution on people that won't stick. When we come to resolution in conflict management, it has to be a resolution that everybody can agree to. Otherwise, it won't stick. You might put a plaster over it, but like getting in the shower with a plaster on, that's going to come off really quickly and it's all going to flare up again. So we need to be very aware that what we're doing needs to be a resolution everybody can sign up to, or the majority of people can sign up to. Now, if you have people that can't sign up to it, part of that resolving conflict is identifying why they can't sign up to it and helping them to get to a place where they can sign up to it or remove themselves from the situation. And we talk about this a lot, and it always comes across as really harsh, but there are times when people can't resolve conflict, they can't stay where the conflict is for whatever reason, and they have to go. And if that's the situation, it's behoved upon us to make sure that they can do that in the best possible way, in a way that means in 6 months' time when you see them in the street, they will cross the road to speak to you, or you can safely and happily cross the road and speak to them. We're not ignoring each other. We're not ending that relationship with acrimony. We're doing this in a positive way that takes us forward. When you get involved in conflict resolution, you need to make sure that you've got plenty of time to follow up. This is what we said. This is what we agreed. This is when we're going to come back to the table. Do that and then follow up again. How's that going? This is what we said. How's it working out for you? Has it solved the problem? How's it working out for other people who were involved in that? What's going on? We need to make sure that any resolution that we come up with, we can walk that walk as well. So if we're saying this is a behavior that needs to change in order to resolve the conflict, we need to demonstrate that behavior. If it's something about productivity, something about a policy, we need to demonstrate it as well. And these will help build trust, build the relationships that help the conflict be resolved for longer term as well. Sometimes it's about having difficult conversations, and we really need to have those difficult conversations at the right time and the right place. And we talk about difficult conversations in another webinar, but it's really important that if they're needed, we have them. And what we can't do in terms of conflict is to take that's just Bob and Sue. You know, Bob does this, Sue does that. These people are always miserable, they're always causing conflict. Let's not bother with it. They're retiring soon. That will solve the problem. We can't do that, because if we do that, other people will see that action is okay, that behavior is fine, and clearly it's not. So we need to deal with these things appropriately at the right time and in the right place. Now, some of the things that we can do in terms of preventing conflict in the first place, I've already talked about some of these, so I won't dwell too much on these. But one of the main things is about transparent leadership. We need to be consistent and clear in our communication. We need to make sure that the whole team is working to the same end, including us. That's very, very important. We need to be seen to follow the rules and processes that we apply to other people. We need to not see us and them. We need to see us as a whole. You know, everybody involved in the team, everybody who I'm looking after, everybody whose success I'm facilitating as that team leader or manager needs to see that I operate in the same way. And I do that consistently. And I demonstrate the values of the organization as well. I demonstrate that I value the team. I demonstrate that by the way I operate, the way I act, the way I talk to people, the parity that I show, the equality that I show, all of the things that we know as good managers that make good teams. Demonstrate my own values and stand by my own values. I demonstrate the values of the organization as well. And I'm very visible. I'm seen to be participating. I'm seen to be approachable. I'm seen to be modeling the values that we're expecting in other people. I listen, I communicate, and I listen more than I talk. And when I'm talking about facilitating. How can we as a team get to a point where we need to be? Because if I dominate and if I impose my thinking on other people, what's that going to do? It's going to cause conflict, isn't it? Because not everyone's going to agree with me. There's instantly a conflict. Those people that agree with me will be seen as the other by people that don't agree with me, and vice versa. So you have a conflict, you know. You never do what you're told, well, you're always sucking up. what's going on, so that we need to be sure that we are consistent, clear, we communicate, we listen. And where we have people that work remotely, working hybrid, we have to remember that they might be out of sight, but they're not out of mind. And we need to make sure that we take time to communicate with them as well. And that may be a different type of communication to the communication we do with people that we're in the face-to-face situations with all the time. We need to let people know what they're doing is working towards the goals and the objectives of the team and the organization. And we need to let them know how what they are doing is making a difference. We need to do that by giving good feedback, meaningful feedback, feedback that says, this is where we're going. The part you have played in this is X, Y, and Z. And this is how you're helping us to meet those goals. If we do that, everybody knows what's going on. It sounds obvious, but that clear, consistent communication, feedback loops going on helps people to avoid conflict in the first place. And we need to hear other voices. We need to seek the opinions of other people. Listen to what they say, take it as a gift, use it, show that you're demonstrating that what you're doing is following on from the feedback that you're getting back from people. And of course, this is all about building trust and building relationships. It's about how we work together. As I say, and people will trust people who demonstrate trust. So we need to think about that. We need to follow through with our promises. We need to facilitate rather than control. We don't want to micromanage. We don't want to block people off. We don't want to keep people in the dark, because that is definitely going to cause problems down the line, definitely going to cause issues. Now, I mentioned a team charter earlier, and the team charter is a good thing to do at a team meeting. Whether you're a new team, or whether you're refreshing the team, or whether you're just revisiting the charter that you've already set up, think about how you're going to work together, how you're going to deal with conflict, where you're going to deal with conflict, how is that looking appropriate? Has everybody signed up to how we're going to deal with conflict? When you're not in a conflict situation, what are the values of the organization? What are the values of the team? How is what I'm doing working towards those goals that we've set, those objectives that the whole team have set? How is what I'm doing adding to the mission statement and reflecting the mission statement in what we're doing? All of these things will help you avoid conflict in the first place. And if you've got these, you can go back to them as a way of tools to help resolve conflict as well further down the line. So very, very important to have those in place. Important to train your people as well, develop your people so that their communication skills are better, their conflict resolution skills are better. They know how to communicate and how to have those disagreements in an appropriate and professional way that leads to a successful outcome. All of these things we need to think about. But as with all training, don't sheep dip. Look at your team, understand your team, who needs a bit of help, who doesn't, who can provide help to other people if that's what's needed. Think about all these things when we're developing our teams and developing our people, because they will all help you to avoid conflict in the first place. And as I say, they're useful tools once we've got them to go back to help us resolve the conflict as well. Now, when you're thinking about conflict, there's some things that's really worth avoiding and really worth being very clear and stepping back, looking at yourself, that 360 approach, if you like. Am I doing any of these things? So avoid being dictatorial, avoid being controlling. You're there to facilitate the success of everybody else. Don't micromanage people. People don't do well when they're being micromanaged. Allow people to have that flexibility, allow them to have the freedom to do what they think is right, and allow them to come to you when they're challenged, when they're struggling. Allow them to come to you, because that's the best way to prevent conflict in the first place. Don't underestimate the potential of your team members. Understand what you've got in the team. Understand where the hot spots are. Understand where the choke points are. Understand where Bob and Sue are, and if they're going to cause problems, deal with that. Deal with the issues, not with the individuals, remember. Don't let your mouth write checks you can't cash. I love this one. I haven't put the end of it on because obviously it gets a bit offensive. But be very careful that you can follow up. Don't make promises you can't substantiate when you're talking to people. Don't end up in a situation where you're inadvertently promising everything to everybody and playing one off against the other, because that will come back and it will really, really bite you, and it will be difficult to resolve those conflicts because you will be the cause of those conflicts. So again, we step back. Am I in the way here? Am I a hurdle, or am I opening the gate to let people do what they do best and let us all win? Because if you don't win, I don't win. The success of the team is about the team, not about me. If it's about me, there's another reason for conflict, because people will see I'm only doing stuff to keep you where you are, or to get you promoted, or to get you your bonus, or to get you your rise. That's going to cause conflict. Think about what happens when you fail to keep those promises. don't ignore performance issues. You might have individual characteristics that are challenging within your team. You might have personalities that are challenging within your team, but we can't ignore performance problems. If we ignore performance problems, it tells everybody else that that's all right. So if we have a person in our team that we're challenged by, we struggle with because they have a very different personality to us, if we let them do things we know we shouldn't do, that will cause a whole load of conflict everywhere else in the team, because they will be seen to be getting away with it. And the result is, why should I try harder when they get away with it all the time? They're always late. They always have an extended lunch break. They always go home early. They never get their work done. Why should I bother? And then we talk to the person that we like and we say, why aren't you bothering? Well, why should I? So there's a conflict because we haven't dealt with something else that we should have dealt with because it was uncomfortable. We didn't want to have that difficult conversation. So we've caused that conflict to generate in the first place. Don't allow frustrations to fester, but you need to hear them. You need to hear what's going on and allow people time to scream and shout and bang the desk and do what they need to do to get it out of their system. Don't try and stop that because that will just bottle up and come out somewhere else. Allow those things to happen, but as part of your team charter, allow that to happen in an appropriate way where everybody can say, I know this isn't against me. I know this isn't personal. You have your rant, you have your shout, get it out of your system. Do what you need to do to improve your well-being, to improve the way that we're all working together. Let's do it. Let's put it aside. And then like Charterhouse rules, we do it in here. This is safe. We don't take it out. We all agree that everybody can have their moment in here and we respect that. And then we move on. We've dealt with it. We'll move on. That's part of our charter that we're looking at, to how we're going to operate as a team. But do remember, it's not all bad. Not all conflict is bad. You know, that saying that the grit that makes the pearl is the key here. You know, some conflict can be really, really positive and really beneficial and can lead to a much better outcome at the end of the day. So don't think everything's bad. Look at the conflict. Say, is this positive? Is this negative? What's likely to happen with this? What are the outcomes going to be? And make your decisions to move on from there. And now some final thoughts before we open up for questions. In all conflict, be human. That's the absolute key. If I say one thing about conflict, I would say make sure you're being human. And being human is about empathy, understanding, communication, all those things that we talk about. It's about demonstrating trust. It's about demonstrating your own values. It's about being consistent and clear with the people that you're facilitating. Remember, your job is to facilitate their success. Know when to step in, know when to not step in, but don't sleepwalk into bigger conflicts. Know when it's too much for you to deal with. Know when to bring in extra help, whether that's in the form of unions, HR, moderator, mediator, outside bodies, whatever that might be. But know when you've done all you can do and get someone else in to help you. Having clear goals and a clear vision, clear objectives will help avoid conflict in the first place. Think about the environment. Is the environment conducive to working well together, or is the environment that you're working in causing conflict as well? And one example of that is often parking. You know, we often have more cars and more people than we have parking spaces for. That's a good, simple, easy way to cause conflict. Are we thinking about that that's fair to everybody? Or are we saying, Bob and Sue, you can park all day, every day, 5 days of the week. Paul and Jane, you know, if you get here and there's no parking, you're going to have to sort yourself out, go somewhere else, find the parking, but don't be late. And we're not going to recompense you for the cost of the parking, even though Bob and Sue get it free. That's not going to cause a conflict, is it? I'll let you decide on that one. Think about how we're dealing with things that could be solved simply, that if we leave them, will turn into bigger things. Think about Maslow, if you like. Talk to your people, listen to your people all the time, hear what they've got to say, deal with what they've got to say, react to what they've got to say, demonstrate you're listening, demonstrate it's about the team, not about you. But the ultimate thing is be human, be as human as you possibly can with everybody. And remember that everybody you're dealing with is also human. They feel, they hurt, they get angry, they cry, they swear, they do brilliant, brilliant stuff, but they go through all of that all the time. That's the input from me for today. Back to Natasha, because I think we might have some questions.
Thank you, David. We do have a few questions. Please keep them coming through the chat. We shall answer as many as we can on today's session. So are there different approaches that are more effective when working with both local in-person and remote teams?
That's a really good question, especially in today's environment, isn't it? And I think I would use the same approaches. So the main approaches would be to listen, to understand, identify the issue and separate the issue from the person, demonstrate empathy wherever you can, and look jointly for the best way forward. So again, this is not about imposing a resolution on other people, because that way we can fall into the trap of being a parent and child. We act as a parent, we treat them as a child. That causes all sorts of other problems. So we need to be careful about that. The difference when you're dealing with people remotely, of course, though, is we need to be aware of what's unseen. All those non-verbal communication issues that we can't see with people when we're just seeing a head and shoulders. We might not be seeing the anxiety that people are demonstrating. If we don't have a picture, if we've got a poor signal, for example, we might just be talking to somebody on the phone, and we lose most of our communication mechanisms when we're talking to people remotely in that way. So we need to recognize that's happening. We need to give people time to deal with it. And we may have to give people more time when they're remote than when we're face to face with them, because of those things that aren't coming out. They may not be able to express themselves in a way that they would face to face, because they've lost the ability to see you as well. So the non-verbal communications are not there. It can become very much a telling and can send people back to a trigger point where they're perhaps back at school being told off by a teacher. So they need to have time to adjust to what's happened, take in what you've said, analyze what you've said, absorb it, think about it properly, think about it professionally, and then come back to you with their response. So if you're dealing with people remotely, don't always expect a response to something first time. Give them extra time to deal with it.
Thank you. And so as a new manager of an existing team, how can you resolve conflict between colleagues who have worked together for many years, but you know very little about?
Again, that's a really good question, and one that a lot of us face when we first move into management or team leadership. And from my own experience, the biggest thing that you can do is spend time getting to know the people. Don't try and solve anything until you get to know the people. Find out what makes them tick, find out what makes them upset, fills them with joy, gives them a real purpose for being, challenges all of those things, but get to know your team. If there is existing conflict, acknowledge the conflict exists. Don't think, well, this has nothing to do with me, I've just taken over, why are they angry at me? Acknowledge the conflict, allow time for them to demonstrate what that conflict is. But then it's important to reinforce the fact that we're moving on. I understand this conflict exists. I understand there are parts of the team that are not very happy. I understand the whole team is not very happy. But that all happened before I arrived. What I'd like to do is for you to give me an opportunity to move us forward and help us all move forward together as a team. And let's revisit this in a month, 6 months, however long, next week, whatever it might be, in an appropriate timescale, and see if we're moving forward as a team. What we want to avoid is carrying that conflict like a badge of honor. We want to avoid carrying those baggages with people everywhere they go, but we have to acknowledge it exists. We have to understand the history of it, understand how they got to there, what solutions have been tried in the past, what resolution work has been done in the past in order to resolve that. Has that worked? If it hasn't, why not? If it has, what has worked well, and how has that moved things forward? We need to try and understand the facts and assumptions that people are making on all sides, because sometimes historical conflict can be just that, a badge of honor in historical conflict. We don't like people because something they've done in the past, even though that's been resolved. Our grandparents didn't like them, our parents don't like them, we don't like them, even though the situation and the context has all changed. The perspective is that this is something that we disagree with. So we're going to be against it from the start. We need to help people move forward from that. But we need to take it on board, understand it exists, acknowledge it, respect what's gone in the past, and try and agree a joint resolution for the way forward.
And how would you approach a situation where a member of the team are in conflict with their manager?
This is a difficult one, and this is one that often happens. And this is what we were talking a lot about today, really, about the way we manage teams and facilitate teams to prevent this happening. One of the tools I would use for this is the classic 5 whys. Think about what the root of the conflict is, get to the bottom of the conflict, identify the cause of the conflict, and then try and have conversations that will try and agree a resolution for that conflict. Again, we need to focus on the issues, not the individuals, because people will just disagree with people they don't like. And if you don't like your manager and you disagree with them and you're in conflict with them, we need to sit down with those people and say, what is going on? What's the cause of this conflict? What is the issue here? Or is it just a personality clash? Now, if there's a cause, some of the simple things that we identify as causes, maybe criticism. Criticism by your manager can be seen as unfair. Being seen to favour other people rather than you. Managers being unsupportive in an unhealthy culture when the manager is acting a completely different way when it comes to them. Saying to people, well, if you want to go to the dentist, you have to do it in your own time. Oh, hold on a minute, I can't come to this meeting because I'm off to the dentist. So we need to think about, are we demonstrating the things that we are expecting other people to demonstrate? So it can be very simple things, can be very difficult things, but the key really is to think about how do we get to that problem analysis, how to use the 5 whys or something similar. If you have something similar, find out what the actual issue is rather than the individuals. And again, ask, is this a historical conflict? Is this a badge of honor that people are carrying because we've had this conflict going on for so long, and has it actually been resolved without anybody accepting and agreeing that it's been resolved?
Thank you. So when the whole team has the same job description, but some see themselves as more superior due to who they are supporting, how would you kind of resolve the tensions that appear there?
I think the question is, I would start by looking at why they have the same job descriptions. Why are some team members performing a support role that others aren't? What is it about those individuals performing that role that other people can't do? Because if you've not identified that, you've not been clear about that, then the likelihood is that you are going to have conflict, because people will see other members of the team getting special treatment in their eyes. They will assume that they're getting paid more. They will assume that they're getting bonuses, because we haven't said what's going on. We've not given everybody an opportunity to develop and support people. We're picking out people who are, on the face of it, all doing the same job, but clearly in practice are not. So we need to revisit that and say, do we need these people, or do we stop them from doing what they're doing? Have we generated this unconsciously? Are we causing people to do things they're not being recognized for in some way? And that recognition doesn't always have to be money, but it could be an enhanced job description. For example, you might have, everybody is a job role A, but 4 of those people are job role A plus. We recognize that, we have different expectations for them, and everybody understands what those expectations are and what the criteria are for becoming an A plus. So we need to make sure that everybody's very clear of that. And that really comes back to communication, why we're doing what we're doing, what we're going to do about the understanding of that. Is everybody aware of why that is?
That's great.
The biggest assumption that people make is if someone's doing that, they're getting more money.
Yeah. So we're going to take a few questions from the live audience now. So what if conflict arises after you call someone out on not following the organization's values?
I would, this often happens, and I would take a coaching approach with this, and I would sit with the person and say, we talked about this. We understand that what you're doing is contrary to what we're all doing as a team. You're not following the organization's values. Go back to that 5 whys, if you like, and get to the root of, is there anything stopping you from following these values? What is it that's causing you not to demonstrate these values? Is it that you don't understand what the values are, in which case we can help you? Is it that you just don't agree with the values, in which case we can help you potentially be somewhere else? I'm not going to fire you, but what the best thing for you might be to do is to look at your options, look at your alternatives here. Is this something you can get behind, or do you need to transfer to another team, to another position, to another organization? But if they're not demonstrating the values, we need to understand why they're not demonstrating the values before we can resolve the situation. Again, remember, just imposing a solution on somebody, you must follow these values or you're out, isn't going to work. It's not going to work. Because they will either slink away and say, well, you do what you like, I'm going to concentrate on getting out of here. Or they'll tell you what you can do with your job and walk.
Yes. A very similar question is, how do you go about resolving conflict caused by performance where there are no clear guides on values or what's expected?
This comes back to preventing, Helena, preventing conflict before it actually starts. Because if you don't have those clear guides and values on what is expected, you are going to get conflict. So you need to revisit what you're expecting people to do. Do they clearly understand what is required of them? Because if not, they will make that up themselves, and that will cause conflict. If not, they will fill in the blanks themselves, and that will cause conflict as well. Because 2 people in that position will come up with 2 different reasons for doing what they're doing. two different quality levels, two different expectations, and that will cause conflict between them and you and the rest of the team as well. So we need that clarity of vision, that clarity of goals. Why are you doing what you're doing? How is what you're doing adding to those values and goals?
That's great. So we have another question here, which is one that I think you'll probably advise not to fall into that parent-child situation. Is how would you advise dealing with conflict where both parties involved refuse to sit together and try and resolve it?
Yeah, parent and child, and you need to be an adult here. If you're dealing with this, you need to be an adult. And first of all, I would say, okay, let's deal with the issues the individuals have. What is stopping you from sitting at that table? What is stopping you from getting in that room with that person? Because if you can't deal with that, then that's the point where you may say, actually, I need someone else to come in and deal with this, because I've done all I can here to get these people together, and they're still not able to sit in a room and talk to each other. Now, we need to think about this, because they may be functioning brilliantly as part of the team. They may be doing everything we need them to do, but causing such a disturbance in doing that we have to deal with that. So we need to get them to understand what their behavior is, why their behavior is causing a problem. Get them to see if they understand the effect their behavior is having. Try to understand why they can't be in a room with each other. Try to understand historically what's gone on and see if we can come to a joint resolution. But if you need to, that's the time to get somebody else in.
And obviously focus on the facts.
Focus on the facts, not the individual characteristics of those people.
Brilliant. So this is probably a more specific question, but how would you handle a conflict where a person's been promoted, but there are people in the team who don't necessarily agree with that promotion? What would you deal with the conflict there? How would you start?
Oh, this is a good one, Christopher, and this always happens when you promote within the team. Somebody, whether they voice it or not, will disagree and will cause conflict, and somebody will feel that they've been overlooked, and somebody will feel that they've done better at the interview process and didn't get the job for X, Y, and Z reasons that are nothing to do with it. So what we have to do is we have to support those managers and help them to stamp their authority on the team early on. Now, we don't do this in a clandestine way, but what we say is we're very clear why that person got the job. What was it about that person that enabled them to move up to manager? What was it? Have we been clear? Have we been fair? Have we been transparent in the process of doing that? Or we look back and we say, actually, we've caused this problem because 3 people from the team applied for the role, but we knew which one we wanted when we wrote the job description. And that's going to cause problems. So we need to think back. Are we the root cause of the problem? Is the process that we followed, if we follow those 5 whys, are we the root cause of the problem? Is the process the root cause of the problem? And if it is, we need to think again about how we resolve that. And we need to be very clear about these things before we start. So often when we do things, there's a period of looking back, looking at the unintended consequences, not just the result as we initially might see it. So we need to think about what's the knock on with that. How are we going to communicate that? How are we going to deal with that challenge before we engage that person? So we look at a person and we say, out of Bob, Sue, and Carol, Carol is the right person for this job. Why? What does Carol have to add to this job that Bob and Sue don't have? We're going to communicate that clearly. We look at the wider things and we say, okay, if we put Carol in this position, are we being fair to Carol? Can we defend Carol? Will we stand up and defend Carol or not? And if we can't do that without thinking about it, we need to revisit that and say, okay, let's just understand how Carol meets the job specification and job description better than the other 2. Because if we can't do that, we're going to have conflict and we're going to cause ourselves a problem. Now, a conflict like that, you could say is justifiable because I'm seeing somebody in a post who I believe isn't the best person for the post. So then the manager's role is to understand, why do you think that person is not the best person for the role? Because they may not know the whole story. We may say, well, Carol's got X, Y, and Z that nobody else in the team knows about, but that's just what we need. And so from the team's point of view, why is Carol in that position? Well, Carol has X, Y, and Z. Oh, I didn't know that. That makes it clear. I understand now. So we need to make sure that the open, clear transparency is constant throughout the whole process. Otherwise, we're setting Carol up to fail from the start, and we're setting ourselves up for a lot of grief, setting the team up for a lot of grief, and ultimately it won't work.
That's great. We do still have loads and loads of questions, so we won't be able to get to all of them. We only have about 5 minutes left. But how would you say you could engage someone who's been disengaged, who are perhaps, having a bad influence on other people in the team?
Again, this is a kind of backward looking one. And I'm going to call on the 5 whys again here, because I personally love the 5 whys. But why are they disengaged? What has caused that disengagement? Is that historic, and are they wearing it as a badge of honor because that gives them something to hang on to? And what's stopping them from moving on from that? But why are they disengaged? Why are they not moving on if they're disengaged? Why are they still hanging around in an environment they're disengaged in? Is there anything we can do to help move that on? But until we understand why they're disengaged, we can't really do anything about it. Once we understand, we can work together for a resolution to help that. And sometimes it is just about disengaged because I didn't know this. You haven't told me that. Now you've told me that. I understand fully. If you'd said that at the beginning, I would be fully on board and fully engaged. You often find this with long-term team members who can get lost in the communication chain. So people who've been there forever, there is an assumption sometimes that they know everything that's going on, and they don't. And we fall into that trap, and we have to make sure that everybody is communicated with equally. So think about your long-termers, think about your remote and hybrid workers. Do they actually know what's going on? Or have you made the assumption that they do just because you've told some people, you've assumed that everybody knows? So we have a responsibility in this as team leaders and managers as well.
That's great, thank you. So that is it for today's session. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and thank you, David, for your insights and expertise. Don't forget, if you're a member of CMI, you can log into Management Direct using the link in the live chat, and you can find a wide range of exclusive and practical development resources, as well as a few of the webinars that David mentioned on conflict and difficult conversations. If you're not yet a member or subscriber, you can join our community via the link that's also in the live chat to gain full access to our Management Direct portal. You can also sign up to the free CMI newsletter for the latest trends and tips for managers and leaders. Please do take a few moments to fill out our evaluation form. We've dropped the link in the live chat for you. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.